Inviting his struggling ex-girlfriend to his wedding was supposed to be Caleb Sterling's ultimate victory lap. It was his chance to flaunt his wealth and perfect new bride while rubbing Audrey's nose in the dirt. He expected tears. He expected her to crumble under the weight of his success. He never expected her to actually accept the invitation, nor did he anticipate the two guests she brought with her. When Audrey walked through the church doors, she didn't just interrupt the ceremony. She buried Caleb's reputation in a single heartbeat. The envelope was heavy, cream-colored, textured cardstock, likely milled in Italy, with calligraphy so ornate it looked more like a royal decree than a wedding invitation. Audrey Miller stared at it, lying on her scratched kitchen table, the bold, gold-embossed letters glinting under the harsh, fluorescent light of her small apartment. Mr. Caleb Sterling and Miss Jessica Thorne invite you to share in their joy. Audrey felt a bitter laugh bubble up in her throat, though it sounded more like a choke. Joy. Caleb didn't know the meaning of the word unless it came at someone else's expense. It had been 3 years. 3 years since she had packed 2 suitcases in the middle of the night, terrified and heartbroken, and fled the glass-walled penthouse that Caleb called a home. 3 years since he had told her she was worthless, barren, and an anchor dragging down his potential. He was the golden boy of Chicago real estate, charismatic, ruthless, and terrifyingly narcissistic. Audrey had been the art student he'd plucked from obscurity, molded into a trophy, and then discarded when she dared to have an opinion. "Why is he doing this?" Margot, Audrey's best friend and lifeline, asked, picking up the invitation with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated waste. She scanned the RSVP card. It's at the St. Regis. Black tie. No children. Margot scoffed. "He knows you're struggling, Audrey. He probably thinks you're still working at the diner. This isn't an invitation. It's a summons to a humiliation ritual." Audrey took a sip of her lukewarm coffee. "He wants to see me alone," she whispered. "He wants to see that I haven't moved on, that I'm miserable without his money." "And are you?" Audrey looked up, her green eyes hardening. "I was miserable with his money. Now I'm just tired. But I'm free." The invitation included a handwritten note on the back, scrawled in Caleb's sharp, jagged handwriting. "Audrey, I know things ended roughly, but I want you there. I want you to see that people can change. Besides, Jessica is eager to meet the woman who came before her. Don't be bitter. Come toast to my happiness." "See, don't be bitter," Margot read aloud, gagging. "The audacity. He cheated on you with his secretary, kicked you out at 3 a.m., and blocked your credit cards before you reached the elevator. And he wants a toast?" "He wants a show," Audrey corrected. "He wants to show Jessica that he's the benevolent ex, and he wants to show his high society friends that poor, pathetic Audrey is still pining for him." Audrey stood up and walked to the window. Her apartment was small, situated in a noisy neighborhood far from the lakefront views Caleb enjoyed, but it was warm. It was filled with toys, laughter, and chaos. "You're not going," Margot stated firmly. "Throw it in the trash." Audrey didn't answer immediately. She watched the street below, her mind flashing back to the last time she saw Caleb. The coldness in his eyes when he told her he never wanted a family with her. "You're not mother material, Audrey. You're decorative. Don't confuse your role." She turned back to the table, picking up the heavy cardstock. Her thumb brushed over the "no children" stipulation. "He thinks I'm alone," Audrey said softly. "He thinks I've spent the last 3 years crying in a studio apartment." "Audrey," Margot warned, sensing the shift in the air. "He thinks he's untouchable, Margot. He thinks he can drag me back into his orbit just to kick me one last time." Audrey's hand trembled, not with fear, but with a sudden, searing rage she hadn't felt in years. "He wants to humiliate me? Audrey, what are you thinking?" Audrey looked towards the bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. From inside, the sound of soft giggling and the thud of wooden blocks hitting the floor drifted out. "I'm thinking," Audrey said, a dangerous smile touching her lips for the first time that day, that it's rude to decline a wedding invitation, especially when the groom is the father of my children. The timeline was tight. The wedding was in 2 weeks. For 3 years, Audrey had kept the secret guarded like a state treasure. When she left Caleb that night, she hadn't known. It wasn't until 2 weeks later, living on Margot's couch, sick to her stomach every morning, that she took the test. Positive. She had tried to call him, once. His assistant, a woman named Beverly, who looked at Audrey like she was a stain on the carpet, had answered, "Mr. Sterling has instructed me to tell you that any further attempts to contact him will be considered harassment. He has moved on, Miss Miller. I suggest you do the same." Audrey had hung up, the phone slipping from her sweaty palms. She realized then that if she told him, he wouldn't embrace fatherhood. He would take them. He had the best lawyers in the city. He would paint her as unstable and unfit, and he would take the baby just to punish her, raising the child clarified by nannies and boarding schools. So she vanished. She changed her number. She moved to a different part of the city, where Caleb's shiny Mercedes never ventured. She took her mother's maiden name, and then the universe laughed. It wasn't a baby, it was babies, Leo and Liam, 2 boys with Caleb's dark curls and piercing blue eyes. Now they were 2.5 years old, toddlers with energy to burn and vocabularies that surprised her every day. They were the center of her world, the reason she worked double shifts at a graphic design firm and took freelance art commission-ons at night. They were happy, loved, and safe. But Caleb had breached the wall. He had found her address. He had sent the invitation. "You can't bring them," Margot argued the next day, as they sat in a bridal boutique. "Not for a bride, but for Audrey. It's a war zone, Audrey. He'll sue you for custody before the cake is cut." "He can try," Audrey said, examining a dress on the rack. It was a stunning emerald green silk gown, sleek, sophisticated, and nothing like the mousy, pastel sundresses Caleb used to force her to wear. But he's a public figure now. He's running for city council next year, isn't he? I saw the billboards. Yeah, Sterling for a sterling future. Makes me want to vomit. Exactly. Audrey pulled the dress out. He cares about his image more than anything. If I show up with his secret sons that he abandoned, or at least that's how it will look, he can't attack me. Not in front of the press. Not in front of the city's elite. "It's a gamble," Margot said, chewing her lip. "A massive one." "It's closure," Audrey corrected. "He needs to know he didn't break me, and he needs to know he doesn't own me. I'm not going there to beg for child support. I'm going there to show him what he lost." She bought the dress. It cost a month's rent, dipping into her meager savings. But it was necessary armor. She wasn't going as Audrey the victim. She was going as Audrey the mother. The night before the wedding, Audrey sat Leo and Liam down. They were dressed in tiny, matching tuxedos she had found at a vintage shop and tailored herself. "We're going to a party tomorrow," she told them, smoothing Leo's unruly hair. "Cake?" Liam asked, his eyes widening. "Yes, big cake," Audrey promised. "But you have to be very good. You have to stay with Mummy." "Who is the party for?" Leo asked. He was the perceptive one, always asking questions that seemed too old for his age. Audrey hesitated. She looked at his face, a miniature replica of the man who had tossed her aside. "It's for a man who used to know Mummy, a man who made a big mistake." Leo nodded solemnly, though he didn't understand. That night, Audrey didn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing the moment. She knew the layout of the St. Regis ballroom. She knew Caleb's crowd, the shallow socialites, the cutthroat developers, the gossiping wives. They would all be waiting for her to fail. She remembered the last thing Caleb said to her. "You're nothing without me, Audrey. You're invisible." She turned over, pulling the duvet tight. "Tomorrow," she thought, "I'm going to be the only thing they see." The grand ballroom at the St. Regis was a testament to excessive wealth. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a warm golden glow over 300 guests. The tables were draped in heavy satin. The centerpieces were towering arrangements of white orchids and hydrangeas imported from Ecuador, and the champagne flowed like water. At the head table, Caleb Sterling sat like a king, surveying his dominion. He looked impeccable in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, his hair gelled to perfection, his smile practiced and blinding. Next to him, Jessica, his new bride, looked like a porcelain doll, beautiful, stiff, and radiating a cold sort of triumph. Her dress was a Vera Wang masterpiece, but her eyes were sharp, darting around the room as if calculating the net worth of every guest. "Do you think she'll actually come?" Jessica whispered, leaning in close to Caleb so the guests wouldn't hear. She took a sip of champagne, her manicured nails tapping against the flute. "It's pathetic, really." Inviting her. Caleb chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated in his chest. "That's the point, Jess. If she doesn't come, she's a coward. If she does, she sees this." He gestured expansively at the room. "The senators, the real estate tycoons, the old money families. She sees that she was just a stepping stone. It's closure, for her." "You just want to gloat," Jessica teased, though there was a hint of insecurity in her voice. "You want to make sure she's still miserable." "I want to make sure she knows her place," Caleb corrected, his voice hardening for a split second before returning to its charming veneer. "She was difficult. Towards the end. She thought she was my equal. I need her to see that some people are destined for the penthouse and some are destined for the basement." Brent, Caleb's best man and business partner, leaned over from the next seat. "Security has the list, right? No scenes?" "Relax, Brent," Caleb dismissed him. "Audrey doesn't make scenes. She cries in bathrooms. She's meek. If she shows up, she'll stand in the back, drink a glass of cheap wine, and leave before the cake is cut. I just want the satisfaction of seeing the look on her face when she sees Jessica." At the entrance of the hotel, the atmosphere was different. The air was crisp, and the valet line was a parade of Bentleys and Porsches. A modest black sedan pulled up. It wasn't a luxury car. It was a rental, clean, but indistinguishable. The valet frowned slightly, stepping forward with less urgency than he had for the Ferrari before it. The back door opened. First came the shoe, a stiletto heel, sharp as a dagger, wrapping around a slender ankle. Then the dress. Emerald green silk spilled out, catching the streetlights. Audrey Miller stepped onto the pavement. She stood tall, her shoulders back, her chin lifted. The nervousness she had felt the night before had calcified into something colder, harder. She wasn't trembling. She was vibrating with adrenaline. She reached back into the car. "Okay, boys, just like we practiced. Hold hands." Two small figures emerged. Leo and Liam, identical in their miniature black tuxedos, their curly dark hair brushed back, looked like tiny princes. They blinked at the bright lights of the hotel entrance, their little hands gripping Audrey's. "Wow," the valet breathed, forgetting his snobbery for a moment. "Can I get the door for you, ma'am?" "Thank you," Audrey said, her voice smooth. She handed him the keys. She walked towards the revolving doors, a boy on either side of her. They were a striking trio, the woman in the jewel-toned gown and the two solemn, beautiful children. Inside the lobby, the head usher, a man named Reynolds, who prided himself on keeping the riffraff out, stepped forward immediately. He saw the children, and his face pinched into a scowl. "I apologize, madame," Reynolds said, blocking her path to the ballroom foyer. "The wedding reception is strictly adults only. The invitation clearly stated—" Audrey didn't stop. She didn't even slow down. She stopped inches from him, forcing him to take a step back. She reached into her clutch and pulled out the cream-colored envelope, tapping it against his chest. "I'm aware of the policy," she said, her voice projecting clearly in the echoing lobby. "But the groom, Mr. Sterling, insisted I come. And as these are his sons, I assumed the family exception applied." Reynolds froze. The colour drained from his face. "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me," Audrey said, a small, dangerous smile playing on her lips. "Unless you want to be the one to tell Caleb Sterling that you turned away his own flesh and blood on his wedding day?" I'm sure he'd be delighted to hear that. It was a bluff, sort of. Caleb would be furious, but Reynolds didn't know that. Reynolds knew Caleb Sterling was a man with a short temper who fired people for bringing him the wrong coffee. The risk of offending the groom by turning away his secret family was far higher than the risk of breaking a no kids rule. Reynolds swallowed hard. He looked at the twins. They stared back with Caleb's eyes. The resemblance was subtle to a stranger, perhaps, but undeniable to anyone looking for it. Of course," Reynolds stammered, stepping aside and bowing slightly. "Right this way, Miss Miller," Audrey said. "But the boys are Sterlings." She took a deep breath, squeezed the small hands in hers, and walked toward the double mahogany doors. Behind those doors, 3 years of silence were about to end with a bang. The reception was in that lull period between the salad course and the main entree. The noise level was high, clinking silverware, laughter, the hum of hundreds of conversations. A jazz quartet played softly in the corner. Caleb was standing near the stage, microphone in hand. He loved the sound of his own voice, and he had decided to give an impromptu speech before the best man's toast. "You know," Caleb boomed, his charisma turned up to 11, "success isn't just about the buildings you own or the deals you close. It's about legacy. It's about building a future that stands the test of time. Jessica and I—" He paused, looking lovingly at his bride. "We are starting a dynasty today." Applause rippled through the room. "I look around this room," Caleb continued, "and I see loyalty. I see the people who stuck by me. I invited everyone from my past and present because I wanted you all to witness." The heavy mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. Usually, when doors open during a speech, people glance back and then look away. But these doors opened with a heavy, distinct thud that echoed in the microphone-amplified room. And then there was the click-clack of heels on the marble entryway, followed by the softer patter of small shoes. Audrey didn't sneak in. She walked right down the center aisle, the path the bride had taken only hours before. The emerald green dress was a slash of vibrant color against the sea of black tuxedos and pastel gowns. It hugged her frame perfectly, showing off a confidence that the old Audrey never possessed. But it wasn't the dress that stopped the room. It was the 2 boys. A hush started at the back of the room, like a wave rolling toward the shore, and crashed into the front. Table by table, conversations died. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Caleb, blinded by the stage lights, couldn't see clearly at first. He squinted, annoyed at the interruption. "It seems we have late arrivals," he joked into the mic, expecting a laugh. Nobody laughed. Audrey kept walking. She stopped 10 feet from the head table, right in the center of the dance floor. The silence was now absolute. The jazz band trailed off, the drummer catching the vibe and silencing his cymbal with a hand. Caleb's vision adjusted. He saw the green dress first. He recognized the red hair, styled in glamorous waves. His stomach dropped. Audrey. She looked incredible. That was his first thought, an involuntary reflex. She looked nothing like the broken girl he had discarded. Then his eyes traveled down. He saw the 2 boys clinging to her hands. They were dressed in tiny tuxedos. They had dark, curly hair. They had high cheekbones. Caleb felt the blood drain from his face so fast it made him dizzy. The microphone slipped slightly in his sweaty palm, creating a sharp feedback whine that made everyone wince. But no one looked away. Jessica, seated at the table, stood up slowly. Her face was a mask of confusion that was rapidly cracking into horror. "Audrey," Caleb said into the microphone, his voice lacking its usual boom. It sounded thin, strangled. What are you doing here?" Audrey didn't need a microphone. She had the room's undivided attention. She pitched her voice perfectly, loud enough for the head table and the first few rows to hear, knowing the silence would carry her words to the back. "You sent the invitation, Caleb," Audrey said, holding up the envelope. Her voice was steady, calm. "You wrote a note. You said you wanted me to see your happiness. You said you wanted to meet the woman who came before Jessica." She looked down at the boys. Liam, say hello to the groom." "Hello," the boys chorused in their high, sweet voices. They waved. The resemblance was a sledgehammer. Now that they were under the chandeliers, closer to the stage, the guests could see it. The murmurs began, a low roar of realization. My God, look at their eyes. They look exactly like Caleb did in his college photos. How old are they? 2? 3? Caleb stepped off the stage, abandoning the microphone. He walked toward her, his movements stiff, like a marionette. Panic was clawing at his throat. He was running for city council. He was sterling for a sterling future. He had just given a speech about legacy. "Audrey," he hissed when he was close enough that only she could hear. His eyes were wide, frantic. "Who are they? Why did you bring children here? The invite said no children." "I know," Audrey smiled. It was a cold smile, "but I couldn't find a babysitter. And since you're so big on legacy and dynasty," she gestured to the boys, "I thought it was time you met yours." Jessica was at Caleb's side now. She looked from the boys to Caleb and then to Audrey. She wasn't stupid. She saw the timeline in her head. 3 years. The boys looked to be about 2.5. "Caleb," Jessica's voice was trembling. "Who are these children?" Caleb looked at Jessica, then at the crowd, then at the boys. He was trapped. If he denied them, and a DNA test proved him wrong later, his political career was dead. If he admitted it, his marriage was starting on a lie of catastrophic proportions. Caleb stammered. The arrogant real estate mogul, the man who could close $1 million deal in his sleep, was speechless. Audrey leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a knife slide. "You told me I was barren, Caleb. You told me I was useless. You threw me out like trash." She straightened up, addressing the room again. "I'm sorry to interrupt the festivities. I just wanted to return the RSVP in person. We won't be staying for dinner. It seems a bit crowded at the head table now." She turned to leave. "Wait!" It wasn't Caleb who shouted. It was his mother, Eleanor Sterling, the matriarch of the family, sitting at table 1. She was a woman of iron will and old money, terrifying in her own right. She stood up, her cane hitting the floor with a crack. "Stop right there," Eleanor commanded. She walked toward Audrey, ignoring her son completely. She stopped in front of the twins. She peered down at them, her sharp blue eyes scanning their faces. Leo, the brave one, looked back at her. "Nice hat," he said, pointing to a fascinator. Eleanor's face, usually carved from granite, softened in a way no one had seen in decades. She looked up at Caleb, her eyes blazing with fury. "You knew?" Eleanor demanded of her son. "No," Caleb shouted, finally finding his voice. "Mother, I swear I didn't know. She hid them. She stole them." "Stole them?" Audrey spun around, her temper finally flaring. "I called you, Caleb. 2 weeks after I left. Your assistant, Beverly, told me that if I contacted you again, you'd sue me for harassment. You blocked my number. You blocked my emails. You erased me." The crowd gasped. All eyes turned to Caleb. He was sweating profusely now. "That's a lie," he tried, but his voice cracked. "Is it?" Audrey challenged. "Beverly is right there at table 4. Shall we ask her?" Caleb looked at Beverly. Beverly, looking terrified, stared at her salad plate, refusing to make eye contact. Her silence was a confession. Eleanor Sterling turned back to Audrey. "You are not leaving," she stated firmly. "These are my grandsons, and this wedding," she looked at the terrified bride and her sweating son, "has just become very secondary." The hall was in chaos. Waiters stopped serving. Phones were out, recording. The carefully curated image of Caleb Sterling, the family man, the golden boy, was shattering in real time, broadcasted on Instagram Live by half the guests. Audrey looked at Caleb. He looked small. He looked defeated. And for the first time in 3 years, Audrey didn't feel fear. She felt absolute, intoxicating power. "We aren't staying, Eleanor," Audrey said respectfully but firmly. "I don't belong here, and neither do they. Not in this world." She turned the boys around. "Come on, loves. Let's go get that cake I promised you somewhere else." "Audrey, wait!" Caleb lunged forward, grabbing her arm. It was a mistake. The moment his hand touched her skin, the spell of polite society broke. The silence in the ballroom broke the moment Caleb's fingers dug into Audrey's bare arm. It wasn't a caress. It was a shackle. "You don't get to walk in here, drop a bomb like this, and just walk away," Caleb snarled, his face inches from hers. The charming mask had completely dissolved, revealing the erratic, controlling man Audrey had escaped 3 years ago. "You're ruining my life." Audrey didn't pull away immediately. She looked down at his hand gripping her skin, then up into his eyes. Her expression wasn't one of fear, but of profound pity. "I'm not ruining your life, Caleb," she said, her voice eerily calm amidst the rising murmur of the crowd. "I'm just turning on the lights. Get your hands off her!" The shout didn't come from a guest. It came from Margot. Audrey's best friend had bypassed security during the confusion and was storming down the aisle, phone raised, live-streaming the entire confrontation. Caleb flinched at the sight of the camera. He released Audrey as if burned. "This is private," Caleb yelled, turning to Margot. "Security, get them out!" But the security guards were hesitating. They were looking at Eleanor Sterling, the matriarch, who was still standing by table 1, pale and trembling. She gave a subtle shake of her head. "Stand down." Audrey took a step back, smoothing her arm where his fingers had left red marks. She looked past Caleb to Jessica, the bride, who was standing frozen in her Vera Wang gown, clutching her bouquet so tightly the stems were snapping. "Jessica," Audrey said softly. The room went quiet again to hear her. "I didn't come here to hate you. I came here to warn you. He told me I was the love of his life, too. He told me I was his partner, until I became inconvenient." She glanced at the twins, then back to the bride. "If you stay with him, just make sure you never become inconvenient." Jessica looked at Caleb. She looked at the red marks on Audrey's arm. She looked at the terrified expression of the assistant, Beverly, at table 4. "Is it true?" Jessica asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Did you know about the pregnancy? Did you block her?" "Jess, baby, look at me," Caleb pleaded, switching modes instantly, reaching for her hands. "She's crazy. She's a stalker. She hid them to blackmail me later. I'm the victim here." Jessica pulled her hands away. She looked at the twins. Undeniable, living proof of Caleb's face stamped on another human being. She looked at Audrey's calm, sad demeanor. And then she looked at Caleb's sweating, desperate face. "You're a liar," Jessica said. The realization seemed to hit her physically. "You didn't just hide a past relationship, Caleb. You hid children. You abandoned your own sons." "I did it for us," Caleb argued, a fatal error. "For us?" Jessica laughed, a sharp, hysterical sound. "You didn't even know me 3 years ago." She reached up to her hair, pulling out the diamond-encrusted veil comb that had cost more than Audrey's car. She threw it on the ground. "I can't do this," Jessica announced. She turned to the crowd, to the cameras, to the elite of Chicago. "The wedding is off." Chaos erupted. It was total, unbridled pandemonium. Guests were standing, shouting, taking photos. The waiters were retreating. Caleb stood alone in the center of the dance floor, the ruins of his perfect day swirling around him. He turned back to Audrey, his eyes filled with a dark, promising hatred. "You will regret this," he whispered, low enough that the cameras couldn't pick it up. "I will take them from you. I will bury you in legal fees until you're begging on the street. You wanted my attention, Audrey? Now you have it. Audrey leaned down and picked up Leo and Liam. They were scared now, sensing the tension. Come for me, Caleb, she said, hugging her sons tight. But remember one thing. I have nothing to lose. You have everything. She turned and walked out, Margot flanking her like a bodyguard. As they passed the tables, people actually parted ways, making a path for the woman in the green dress. Outside, the cool night air hit Audrey's face. She felt lightheaded. Did you get it? Audrey asked Margot as they buckled the boys into the car seats. Margot held up her phone, grinning savagely. 20,000 live viewers, Audrey. It's already trending on Twitter. #Sterling Wedding Crashers. The world just saw him grab you. The world just saw the bride dump him. Audrey slumped against the car door, the adrenaline finally crashing. She began to shake. He's going to come for the boys, Margot. Let him, Margot said, starting the engine. We have the truth. And for the first time, we have witnesses. The nuclear fallout began at approximately 9:14 p.m. on the night of the wedding, the exact moment the first high-definition clip of the twins hit the internet. By Monday morning, the footage hadn't just gone viral. It had become a cultural phenomenon. The Emerald Mother, as the tabloids dubbed Audrey, was the face of every morning talk show from coast to coast. But Caleb Sterling was not a man who retreated. He was a man who scorched the earth. While Audrey was tucked away in her small apartment, shielding Leo and Liam from the paparazzi camped on her sidewalk, Caleb was in a high-rise war room. He had hired Garrett and Associates, a firm known in legal circles as the Meat Grinders. They didn't just win cases, they erased the opposition. By Wednesday, the counterstrike landed. A process server didn't just knock on Audrey's door, he pounded on it until the neighbors came out. Audrey was served with an emergency motion for full sole custody and a defamation lawsuit totaling $20 million. He's not trying to get the kids, Audrey's lawyer, Sarah Jenkins, said as she paced her cramped paper-filled office. Sarah was a sharp-featured woman who lived on caffeine and spite. She had taken Audrey's case pro bono because she hated men like Caleb. He's trying to bankrupt your soul, Audrey. Look at these claims. Audrey read the filing, her hands trembling. It was a masterpiece of fiction. Caleb's lawyers claimed she was a predatory opportunist who had kidnapped the children. They alleged she had suffered a psychotic break 3 years ago, and that her appearance at the wedding was a calculated act of domestic terrorism designed to extort the Sterling estate. He says I'm an addict, Audrey whispered, pointing to a paragraph citing unspecified substance abuse. Standard play, Sarah snapped. He wants to force you into a psych eval and a drug test. It ties you up in red tape while he controls the microphone. And look at the news. Sarah turned on the television. A celebrity news outlet was interviewing a woman named Lydia, a girl Audrey hadn't spoken to since high school. Audrey was always intense, Lydia said, looking into the camera with faux sympathy. She had a thing for rich guys. We always joked she'd do anything to secure the bag. Seeing her show up with those kids, it felt like a heist, not a homecoming. He bought her, Audrey said, the realization sinking in. He's buying my entire past. Then we start buying the truth, Sarah replied. The first hearing was set for Friday. It was a show cause hearing to determine if the children should be immediately removed from Audrey's care. The tension in the hallway of the Cook County Circuit Court was thick enough to choke on. Caleb arrived like a martyr. He was flanked by 6 security guards and a PR specialist who whispered in his ear. He wore a navy suit, a crisp white shirt, and a look of practiced, somber dignity. He didn't look like a man who had just been dumped at the altar. He looked like a father who had finally found his lost lambs. I just want to be a dad, Caleb told a reporter from the Tribune, his voice cracking perfectly for the microphones. I was robbed of their first steps, their first words. I don't care about the money or the wedding. I just want my sons back from the woman who stole them. Inside the courtroom, Judge Holloway presided. He was a man with a face like a dried apple, and eyes that had seen every lie in the book. He didn't like cameras, and he didn't like drama. Caleb's lead attorney, Arthur Pym, stood up. Pym was a man who radiated expensive cologne and arrogance. "Your Honor," Pym began, his voice smooth as silk, "my client is a pillar of this community, a man who was prepared to start a family with his new bride, only to have his world shattered by a woman who chose to keep his heirs in a state of poverty and secrecy. Miss Miller didn't hide these children out of fear. She hid them as an insurance policy. She waited until the moment of his greatest public visibility to strike. This isn't motherhood, Your Honor. This is a hostage situation." Pym flourished a folder. "We have medical records, or rather, a lack thereof. These children haven't seen a top-tier pediatrician in a year. They live in a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood with a rising crime rate. Mr. Sterling can provide them with a palace. He can provide them with the Sterling legacy. We ask for the immediate transfer of Leo and Liam Sterling to the Sterling estate." Audrey felt the air leave her lungs. She looked at the judge, who was scribbling notes, his face unreadable. Sarah Jenkins stood up. She didn't have a flashy folder. She had a laptop and a USB drive. "Your Honor, Mr. Pym is right about one thing," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the room like a cold wind. "This is about legacy, but not the one Mr. Sterling is selling to the press." Sarah signaled to the bailiff to dim the lights. "Mr. Sterling claims he was robbed of his children's infancy. He claims he had no knowledge of their existence." She hit a key on her laptop. A series of emails appeared on the large monitor on the wall. "These are internal communications from the Sterling Group's legal department, dated October 2022, Sarah announced. Caleb's posture shifted. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "In these emails," Sarah continued, "Mr. Sterling's personal attorney discusses a problematic communication from a Miss Audrey Miller. He describes a voicemail where she informs Mr. Sterling of a positive pregnancy test. The response from my client's loving father." Sarah clicked again. A transcript of an audio file played through the courtroom speakers. It was Caleb's voice, unmistakable, sharp, and cruel. "I don't care if she's carrying the King of England. Tell her the file is closed. If she calls again, threaten her with a restraining order. If she keeps the kid, tell her I'll make sure she never works in this city again. She's a ghost to me. Make it happen." The courtroom went silent. Even the court reporter's fingers froze over the keys. Caleb's face went from pale to a deep, bruised purple. Pym tried to jump in. "Your Honor, this is an illegal recording. It was taken from a private server. It was provided by a whistleblower, Your Honor," Sarah countered, her voice rising. "Miss Beverly Clean, Mr. Sterling's former assistant, who was fired for disloyalty the morning after the wedding. She kept a burn file of every unethical order Caleb Sterling ever gave. And it gets worse." Sarah opened a new document. "This is a wire transfer. $50,000 paid out from a Sterling shell company to a private investigator 3 months ago. The task? To monitor and suppress Audrey Miller. He knew where she was. He knew she had the twins. He wasn't robbed of their childhood. He was paying to ensure they stayed in the shadows so they wouldn't ruin his political aspirations." Judge Halloway leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Caleb. "Is this true, Mr. Pym? Was your client aware of the children's location 3 months prior to this shocking discovery at the wedding?" Pym stammered, his polished exterior finally cracking. I would need to consult with my client on the specifics of his security details actions. The specifics are clear," Judge Halloway barked. "He lied to this court. He lied in his sworn affidavit." The judge turned his attention to Audrey. For the first time, his eyes softened. "Miss Miller, you stayed silent for 3 years. Why?" Audrey stood up. Her voice was small at first, then grew steady. "Because I knew this would happen, Your Honor. I knew that the moment he remembered we existed, he wouldn't try to be a father. He would try to be an owner. I didn't want my sons to be heirs to a man who thinks people are property. I wanted them to be boys. Just boys." The judge nodded slowly. He turned back to Caleb, and the coldness returned to his face. "Mr. Sterling," Holloway said, his voice echoing in the chamber, "your motion for emergency custody is not only denied, it is dismissed with prejudice. Your behavior, both 3 years ago and in the last 72 hours, suggests a profound lack of parental fitness. In fact, it suggests a predatory nature." The judge banged his gavel. "I am issuing a temporary restraining order. You are to have no contact with Miss Miller or the children. No social media posts, no leaks to the press, no private investigators. You will submit to a full financial audit for the purpose of backdated child support. And if I see your face in this court again with another frivolous motion, I will hold you in criminal contempt." Audrey collapsed back into her chair, sobbing. Sarah squeezed her shoulder. But as the gallery cleared out, Caleb didn't move. He sat at the defense table, staring at the blank monitor where his own voice had just betrayed him. He looked at Audrey, and for a split second the mask slipped. He didn't look sad. He didn't even look angry. He looked hungry. "This isn't over, Audrey," he mouthed silently across the room as the bailiffs escorted him out. He didn't need the law to win. He still had the money. He still had the name. And as he walked out onto the courthouse steps, he didn't look like a defeated man. He looked like a hunter who had just realized his prey was more dangerous than he thought, and he was finally starting to enjoy the chase. As the news vans swarmed him, Caleb put on his sunglasses, hid his rage, and began to whisper to his PR head. The court had ruled, but the city was still his playground, or so he thought. He didn't realize that while he was fighting Audrey in court, a much more powerful force was moving against him in the boardroom. His mother, Eleanor, had watched the live stream of the hearing, and Eleanor Sterling did not tolerate losers. The smear campaign was brutal and efficient. By Tuesday, Caleb's team had leaked stories to the tabloids claiming Audrey had a history of instability. They dug up a speeding ticket from 4 years ago and framed it as reckless endangerment. They found a disgruntled former art professor who called her flighty. Audrey sat in her apartment, the blinds drawn, watching the news. A pundit was debating whether she was a hero mom or a deceptive gold digger. "It's working," Margot said, pacing the living room. "The polls are tightening. People are starting to ask why you hid the kids. He's spinning it that you denied them their birthright out of spite." Audrey looked at Leo and Liam, oblivious to the chaos, building a fortress out of pillows. "I need to speak," Audrey said. "I need to tell the full story, not just snippets in court." "No," a voice came from the doorway. They hadn't heard the knock. Standing in the open door of the apartment, which Margot had left unlocked in her pacing, was Eleanor Sterling. She looked out of place in the cramped hallway, dressed in a Chanel suit that cost more than the entire building. Behind her stood 2 large bodyguards. "Mrs. Sterling," Audrey stood up, instinctively shielding the boys. "May I come in?" Eleanor asked. It wasn't really a question. She stepped inside, her eyes immediately going to the twins. She watched them for a long moment, a strange softness in her usually steel gaze. Then she turned to Audrey. "You don't need to speak, Audrey. If you go on TV, you get into a mudslinging contest with a pig. You both get dirty, but the pig likes it." "He's destroying me, Eleanor," Audrey said, her voice shaking. "He's going to win. He always wins." "He usually does," Eleanor admitted, sitting on the edge of the worn sofa. "Because I usually help him. I've cleaned up his messes since he was a boy. The drunk driving in college, the failed business ventures, the broken hearts," she looked at the pillow fort. "But this is not a mess. These are human beings. My blood." Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out a file. "Caleb thinks he is the company. He thinks he is the future of the Sterling name. But he forgets who built it." "What are you going to do?" "Caleb has called a press conference for tomorrow morning," Eleanor said. He plans to announce a reunification plan for his family to boost his polling numbers. He expects me to stand beside him and nod. Eleanor stood up. Bring the boys to the Sterling Tower tomorrow at 10 a.m. Don't worry about security. You'll be with me. The lobby of the Sterling Tower was packed. Every news outlet in Chicago was there. Caleb stood at the podium, looking solemn and statesmanlike. Behind him was a massive banner. Sterling, family first. I made mistakes, Caleb was saying into the microphones, his voice thick with rehearsed emotion. I was a workaholic. I missed signs. But I am ready to step up. I am ready to be the father Leo and Liam deserve. And I call upon their mother to stop using our children as pawns and come to the table. Flashbulbs popped. He looked every inch the reformed leader. And now, Caleb gestured to his right, I'd like to introduce the woman who taught me the value of family. My mother, Eleanor Sterling. Eleanor walked up to the podium. She looked frail, but elegant. She adjusted the microphone. Caleb smiled at her, confident. My son speaks of family, Eleanor began, her voice scratching slightly. He speaks of values. She paused, looking out at the crowd. Then she looked directly at the camera. But a man who discards his own flesh and blood because they are inconvenient is not a man of value. He is a coward. The room went dead silent. Caleb's smile froze. Mother? He whispered. Eleanor ignored him. I have served as the chairman of the board for Sterling Enterprises for 40 years. I have tolerated my son's ambition, but I will not tolerate his cruelty. She pulled a document from her jacket. This morning, the board of directors met in an emergency session. By a vote of 7-0, we have removed Caleb Sterling as CEO, effective immediately. Gasps erupted. Reporters were shouting. Caleb looked like he had been shot. What? Caleb shrieked, forgetting the microphones. You can't do that. It's my company. It was your father's company, Eleanor snapped, her voice suddenly booming. And now it is held in trust. She gestured to the side of the stage. Audrey walked out, holding Leo and Liam's hands. The majority shares of Sterling Enterprises, Eleanor announced, are now placed in an irrevocable trust for the benefit of my grandsons, Leo and Liam Sterling. Until they come of age, the trust will be administered by their legal guardian. Eleanor turned to Audrey. No, their mother. Caleb staggered back, clutching the podium. He had lost the company. He had lost the money. And in that moment, as the camera zoomed in on his face, he lost the election. You're firing me! Caleb screamed at his mother, his face twisting into an ugly mask. For her, she's a nobody. She is the mother of the future of this family, Eleanor said coldly. And you, Caleb, you are just the past. Security stepped forward, not to remove Audrey, but to remove Caleb. As he was escorted off the stage, screaming threats, the image of Sterling for a Sterling future collapsed. Audrey stood at the podium, the boys clinging to her legs. She looked at the sea of cameras. She didn't need to say a word. The image said it all. The king was dead. Long live the queen. 3 years later, the garden was in full bloom. It was a chaotic, colourful garden, nothing like the manicured, sterile lawns of Caleb's old penthouse. Audrey sat on the porch of the large Victorian house in the suburbs, sipping tea. She watched 2 5-year-olds chasing a golden retriever through the sprinklers. Life had settled. The media storm had eventually died down, as all storms do. Caleb had moved to New York. Stripped of his fortune and his reputation, he tried to start over. But the Sterling brand was toxic. He was currently managing a mid-level sales team for a logistics company. He saw the boys twice a year for supervised visits. He usually spent the time on his phone, and the boys were always relieved when he left. Jessica, the runaway bride, had written a tell-all book titled The Bullet I Dodged, which became a bestseller. She sent Audrey a Christmas card every year. Audrey hadn't used the Sterling money for herself. She used the trust to secure the boys' education and safety, but she kept working. She opened her own design studio, double L designs. She wanted the boys to know that money was something you built, not something you were owed. Eleanor visited every Sunday. She was a tough grandmother. She corrected their grammar and insisted on table manners, but she loved them fiercely. She and Audrey had an uneasy but respectful peace. "Mum, look!" Leo shouted, holding up a muddy rock. "It's a diamond," Audrey laughed, setting her tea down. She walked out into the grass, feeling the warmth of the sun. She picked up the muddy rock and inspected it with serious eyes. "It's better than a diamond, baby," she said, kissing the top of his head. "It's real." She looked back at the house, at the life she had built from the ashes of humiliation. Caleb had invited her to a wedding to end her story. Instead, she had just started a new chapter, and that is how Audrey Miller turned a walk of shame into a walk of fame. Caleb thought he could use his wedding to crush his ex, but he forgot the most important rule of power. True strength isn't about the money or status, it's about what you're willing to protect. In the end, Caleb lost his company, his reputation, and his family, all because he underestimated the quiet woman he once threw away. If you enjoyed this story of karma, betrayal, and ultimate justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What would you have done if you were in Audrey's shoes? Would you have crashed the wedding or stayed silent? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.